Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. I'm Perry Bronson, your pre-sales evangelist and host, and I'm so excited to be here with a couple of pre-sales leaders who will be talking about compensation and culture. We have Carrie Sokolsky, who is the president and founder of Presales Mastery. This is an organization that helps B2B companies win more businesses by improving seller performance through hands-on demo coaching and best practices. And before becoming a founder, Carrie ran technical sales and enablement at IBM for about 10 years. He also spent time as a VP of global sales strategy over at a company called Blueprint Software Systems. How are you doing today, Carrie?
I'm great, and thanks for having me, Perry.
Fabulous. So happy to have you with us. And we also have Brett Crane, who spent 7 years leading SEs at Zuora before joining Vivun as our VP of pre-sales. How are you doing today, Brett?
Great, Perry. Excited to talk about comp and rewards.
Yes, so many insights to come. And just a quick bit about Vivun before we get into it. So Vivun, if you don't know about us, we've got an amazing founding team who spent 25 years in pre-sales. So it's really a for us by us kind of platform, as well as data science and product. And this is really important because of the systems we integrate with, the teams we know that pre-sales works with, and the fact that AI and ML data science really underpin everything that we do. Proud to say we are now a Series C company and very, very happy to have the opportunity to be growing our employee base worldwide. We have over 130 employees now, and we work with some of the most incredible brands in the world, actually, like Snowflake, Zoom, Dell, and so many others. So just a little bit about us, but today we're here to talk about pre-sales leadership, comp, and culture. And in just a moment, Brett will be coming in to discuss some trends that we're seeing in pre-sales, as well as some new tools we've got available for managers. Carrie's going to go into compensation and rewards, as well as culture and coaching. And we will be doing our Q&A over on Slack. So if you're not already in the Slack community, fire it up. You can join at vivun.com/Slack. And our speakers are already in the general channel, just waiting to hear from you. So we'll see you there, and we'll be taking Q&A at the end. With that, I will pass it over to you, Brett.
Thanks, Perry. Welcome, everybody. I'm excited to be here with Carrie and talk a little bit about comp plans and building teams and building culture and attracting and retaining top talent. So, one of the things we wanted to talk about is some statistics and some metrics. I think everyone loves data. We did a benchmark report earlier this year, really to focus on the pre-sales profession as a whole. And some of the things that we found, I think if you look at some of these things, there's a lot of pre-sales people. One of the things we focus on at Vivun, we sell to the pre-sales profession. And so we spend a lot of time figuring out what's the title of someone in pre-sales. We found that there's about 2 million people with that profession across the globe. And pretty interesting because it's much larger than a lot of the field-facing teams, maybe a little smaller than sales, but certainly bigger than some of the other departments like product, customer success, and others. If you look at the companies that are investing in pre-sales, we've actually found that there's over 200,000 companies that have a pre-sales team. They range from very small companies to larger companies. I think some interesting examples of Vivun's customer base, companies like Snowflake, who, if you look over the course of the last, call it 2 to 3 years, have grown from 100, couple hundred, to approaching closer to 1,000 people in pre-sales today. Another customer, Zoom, if you look at them pre-pandemic, they were probably a couple dozen pre-sales people. Now they're in the multiple hundreds to grow into that B2B enterprise space and continue with the demand that they're having as a company. And if you think about are people hiring or not hiring in this market, it's a little bit of a sort of an odd space at the moment in tech. But we're found that over the course of the year, just in this year alone, there's been over 120,000 pre-sales jobs posted. So people are still hiring, even though there might be some contractions in other ways for pre-sales, because pre-sales is such a good investment for organizations to drive revenue. And lastly, we do see that there has been growth year over year. So pre-sales leaders are still able to add to their team. And one of the things that we want to talk about next is, with this demand for pre-sales continuing to be on the rise and an expansion here in the investment in pre-sales, want to talk about what it takes to hire top talent and retain those people too. So one of the things we also wanted to ask pre-sales leaders about is if they're looking for top talent and everyone's fighting for the same people, how do they actually make those decisions, and how do they figure out the right people to hire? Some of the things that we found, if you kind of check out the bubble chart, the big bubbles meaning they're important. One of the things we saw was that presence, or really some of those soft skills, are really important as people think about the right people to hire. I'll come back to that one in just a second. The technical background and acumen, basically the ability to do the pre-sales job at a technical level, is also continues to be very important. And then, of course, given that we sell technology, it is really important that we make things that might on the outset sort of seem complex, we make that simple and easy to understand the value. I mentioned I wanted to come back to that presence and soft skill. One of the things that we found out is that as demand increases, we can't just keep hitting the same exact talent pool. You can't just necessarily recycle all of the same pre-sale resources over and over again. So we've seen that actually some of the pre-sales leaders are expanding their searches across different backgrounds. So if you think about presence being a soft skill that's important to do the pre-sales job, one that you probably can't succeed without, we found, for instance, professors or teachers are a good place to start for some people. They're looking outside of just that pre-sales domain expertise to really look for those types of roles. For people that can actually accomplish the role. And this is also one way to think about, especially as you're looking at things like diversity and inclusion and trying to diversify the pool of culture and thought and experience within your group, that can be something that could be really important to look at. And we've heard that from some of our pre-sales leaders.
Right. I think it's kind of interesting here that business or domain expertise, business background, I think, or acumen is what's referred to here, is actually so low. And I think that's probably a function of the fact that pre-sales leaders now have to look outside of their domain for new headcount. There's just so many open roles out there. There are not enough people to fill them. You just can't find enough people that with that industry expertise. And so this may not be what the ideal candidate looks like for them, but it's what they're actively looking for today.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And speaking from personal experience, I've been in a lot of sort of financial software as what I've been doing in pre-sales in my career. I don't know finance, but I learned it and learned the message. So I may have been one of those non-ideal candidates, but I think one of the things we're looking for, right, are people that can, actually step up, do the job, learn new things. I've even internally here, even though we sell to pre-sales, you would think my domain expertise should be people that know pre-sales. I've actually had good luck with someone that has no experience in pre-sales, actually jumping into the role. They came from a more technical role and fit really nicely with the team. Kind of oozes credibility in what they do. And I've had some opportunity to do that even without that domain expertise that you think might be a sort of a must-have for especially my company. And so as you're looking at hiring, right, it's a hard pool to pull from. We're expanding our criteria here. One of the things is when you find the right person, you need to invest. And we also asked about what's the number one way to retain talent. And so you can see far and away relationships, culture, and coaching is kind of far and away one of the things that people value, right? People want to be at a place where they feel like they are progressing. They feel like they have people that have their back and trust them and give them the opportunity to succeed, and they have the culture that goes with it. I think if I give myself the liberty here to sort of combine two of the categories, competitive comp and rewards and recognition, which you see on the left here, these are things that I think go really nicely into what we're talking about here as well, which is how do you make sure that not only are you coaching people and fostering that career growth that they want, but you need to make sure that they're feeling appreciated from a compensation standpoint, both monetarily, things like equity, commission plans, salary, all those good things, but also from a rewards and recognition, which sometimes may have nothing to do with money, sometimes have to do with experiences, sometimes have to do with just giving them a shout out in the right places at the right time. But those also tend to be very important things to focus on as you're looking to retain this so hard to acquire talent. And I think, so for us, I think one of the things that we wanted to do is help people in this area. Our product is obviously there to help pre-sales teams succeed, but we also wanted to make sure that beyond the data that we provide here, we give more tools to pre-sales leaders. And so I think if we keep moving, we can show you some of the things that we've done as well as it relates to providing things like we have a compensation guide that we provide on the website. So if you're unfamiliar with some of the different types of comp plans that other people doing, maybe in other verticals or other places, other different industries that have pre-sales teams, we've built this guide to help you through, get an understanding of what are the key concepts, how can you think about maybe interlacing some of those concepts into your comp plans. We also have put a tool on the website called the compensation calculator. It's actually a live tool. It's a little piece of software that you can go in, you can plug in some numbers, you can put in some variables as to whether you have things like annual plans or quarterly plans that have accelerators or caps or other things like that that you might want to test out. I actually worked on both the guide and the compensation calculator tool itself. So I'd love to hear your feedback. One of the great things that I think about the tool is you can plug in your numbers, you can see the output, so you can sort of simulate what might happen under certain conditions, and then you can extract it to a spreadsheet to get more your hands-on and maybe make some tweaks. So again, as you do that, if you play with that tool, please do feel to reach out. Carrie will talk in a moment about some additional these concepts that are in things like the guide, but I would like to encourage you guys to stay in touch with us on Slack and throughout the Q&A as well.
Yeah, Brett, one thing I'll call out here is it's really important to understand the impact of both individual and team performance variability on the overall financial impact of whatever comp plan you end up landing on. And so when you do come up with potential plans and are putting them in this calc or any other calculator, leaders should be strongly considering modeling not only their historical results against whatever prospective new plans you're considering, but also do it over the past several years, right? COVID-related, stuff isn't necessarily, and over the last 2 years hasn't necessarily been reflective of what steady state's going to be going forward. So go back as far as you can, but also we want to make sure that we're, modeling it against our projected future results. And the impact here is important for two reasons. One is we want to not only determine the overall impact, but we want to identify when any plan changes can potentially impact individual performers in a material way, right? And if that's the case, it gives us the opportunity to coach them about those changes before the plans get implemented. Where I see a lot of challenges where organizations are bringing in new plans is they educate the team on the plans after they've already been implemented. The new year started, and now the team doesn't know that they need to be focusing on a totally different product in order to get paid at the rate they did last year, or in behave in a totally different way. And if you can coach them ahead of time, then they can start to change their behavior before the new plan year starts and hit the ground running.
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, I think one of the things that I would encourage is go check this stuff out too. You can actually do a lot of the things that Carrie just described. Look at modeling old historical data going way back, looking at future expectations, and seeing how that might, model out in your world. And of course, now is probably the time, maybe not right now, but in the next few months, thinking about what would that plan look like as you approach potentially an end of calendar or fiscal year that might be around the end of the calendar year. Don't do that sort of month of or a couple of days before it's due to give your recommendations. I think one of the things that we want to talk about too is, not only do we want to provide these tools, but we sort of need to provide a platform that can help our customers do these things too. So when we polled the audience here again on pre-sales leadership, what are the things that you struggle with in unlocking budget? For us, it's funny because internally we sell our own product to pre-sales. So we always talk about budget with our prospects. How do we help them get budget? How do we look at things like ROI? How do we make business cases for them to get the right software in place? This applies here as well. And so their response was to, hey, if I'm trying to get budget to build the right compensation or build the right cultural structure of coaching and those types of things, what are my biggest challenges? And by far and away are things like lack of data and the actual time that they have to go do these things. So as you're trying to build out this positive culture, don't forget that there needs to be this realistic business case at the end of the day. If you're going to suggest a new style of comp plan, maybe a change in the comp model that increases comp, or even headcount mix or other things like that. We know you're very, very, very busy people. I think pre-sales leaders have some of the most horrendous looking calendars that are out there. And so we're sort of here to help with that and help you provide some of that data and hopefully gets you and your team some time back with the products we provide.
Yeah, these are great point, Brad. I think the other interesting point here is pre-sales just also hasn't had a lot of experience building their own business plans because they haven't been able to or had the opportunities to buy things like new tools like Vivun and others, and haven't held budget historically. And so they're not necessarily as adept that some other leaders have been in terms of building their own internal business case to advocate for themselves and their teams. And I think that's important. And one of the other things is be involved early in this process, especially when it comes to compensation.
Absolutely. And I think if you think about our products and some of the things that we try to do, not only do we provide the compensation guide, the compensation calculator, but our product itself is intended to help leaders do exactly that and sort of uncover the treasure of data that Presales has for yourselves to make some of these business cases, but also for the organization. Things like positively impacting revenue. What are the things that are actually working for your team to drive revenue, and who's accomplishing those things to ensure that you're able to reward those people in the right way. Opportunities to coach the team. You might have two pre-sales people sitting side by side, actually running the same process, but one has a very high win rate, one has a very low win rate. There might be a good opportunity to coach either internally on what's the right process for better running an opportunity, but there might also be opportunity for them to actually get coaching externally on some of those soft skills, for instance, to accomplish the same results as their best colleagues that are sitting side by side with them doing similar things. And we also provide that data set for our teams. Like if you want to create the right culture and ensure your teams aren't stretched too thin and undercompensated, making sure you have the ability to have the right specialty teams around them. Maybe these could be product specialty or industry expertise, or it could be even teams like RFP teams or demo build teams. Having the right mix of resources, improving the right headcount that's required to have a successful team where everyone can be successful is really important. And then, of course, if you're trying to craft these new comp plans that might lead to maybe budget asks and things like that, you want to make sure you have the data to back it up to say, here are my top resources, here's what they actually are accomplishing, here's the revenue they're driving for the company, and here's how we should be thinking about compensating them going forward. Now, at this point, I think we'll pass it over to you, Carrie, to talk to us a little bit more about some of the concepts. Obviously, you've spent a lot of time in the pre-sales leadership roles yourself and working through detailed comp plans. And I know you've spent a lot of time coaching on compensation in that area too. So I'd like to pass it over to you.
Thanks, Brett. So as Brett mentioned, I spent about a decade at Verisant and IBM running pre-sales and sales enablement. But Verisant and IBM, the unit I was in was the sales performance management unit, which focuses on incentive comp management. So for a decade, I spent building and automating and selling comp plan management systems. So I've seen probably 5,000 different comp plans in my life, which is why I've been exposed to a lot of different ideas in this space. So first thing I want to talk about is the importance around driving the right behaviors through the right comp plan. Even for those of us who aren't fully coin operated, we're all to some extent motivated by our compensation. If we weren't, we'd essentially be volunteers, not employees. And so by extension, how we're compensated drives our behaviors. And the challenge is that it works both ways. Good comp plans are designed to motivate the desired behaviors in our team, but plans that aren't well designed can actually cause people to work against their organizational or team goals. I mean, we think about something like a plan that leverages team-based quotas in the wrong situation can incentivize regression to the mean, because superior individual performers might decide that they're not being directly rewarded for that. And that can cause them to question why they're working so hard when the reward for their hard work is shared across everyone in the organization. In fact, I spoke to an SE earlier this week at a top 10 software company whose quota not only covered their own product area for a team, but 3 other areas as well, that they had absolutely no ability to materially impact the number that they were holding. And so they felt it was appropriate and sufficient to just put a good enough effort in. So the next point I want to make here is that we have to consider how sales is compensated, not just pre-sales, but sales. We often talk about how pre-sales should be an equal partner in the sales process rather than some utility that is pulled off the shelf when the account executive sees fit. And in order to be effective partners with sales, our goals, where possible, should align with theirs as much as we can to ensure we're all aiming in the right direction. And that applies to comp plans as well. The specific rates and thresholds and amounts can differ, but organizations should generally aim to have similar compensation mechanisms for both groups where they can, because when there's misalignment, it can cause a lot of friction and resentment. I mean, when you think about a situation where you've got an account exec that has a $3 million quota and our SE partner has a $50 million team quota, and they work their butts off to close a $2 million deal, the SE is retiring 67% of their quota, or sorry, the AE is retiring 2/3 of their quota, but only, let's say, 2% of the SE's quota, not 4%. Why? Because the AE is going to be paid on the full value of a 2-year contract, and the SE is only paid on the first year, right? And then compounding things, maybe the SE is paid out monthly, or sorry, the sales rep is paid out monthly, but the SE is paid out quarterly. So when there's differences in the mechanisms around how we're paid, right, it can lead to a lot of resentment between different players on the team, because obviously that's going to result in significantly different compensation for the same amount of effort. And so where possible, you want to try and make sure that plans are aligned with sales where they can, to make sure that you're not lowering morale or even contribute to turnover because of that.
Yeah, and I think I've seen this firsthand a couple of times at different companies I've been at. One of the things I would suggest to pre-sales leaders is, to Carrie's point, I would actively try to seek out where those mismatches might exist and look to eliminate those things. And I would, of course, actively try to avoid the creation of brand new mismatches between, the sales team and the pre-sales team's comp plans. I think, just another example here, I've definitely seen things like professional services, additional add-ons, payment terms, or other things that have really, a lot of times, very little control on the SE side, having different comp structures. For instance, AEs might get paid on professional services, SEs might not. In some cases, I've even seen that where SEs are not paid, even though they have a lot of hand in that. So, definitely seeing the reverse of what you said too, where we actually have a lot of work that we put into something and are not compensated on it, or have absolutely nothing to do with the result, and that impacts our comp. So try to avoid those kinds of things if you can, to make sure you're protecting your team against that frustration that'll occur.
Yeah, great points. So the importance here is that driving right behaviors actually has a material impact on attainment to quota for both individuals and sales orgs as a whole. And there's some interesting data that backs this up. CSO Insights did a study that showed that organizations where the comp plan consistently drove the right precise selling behaviors saw 7% higher overall revenue attainment to plan for the entire organization. What's even probably more impressive is that 33% more people on the sales team either met or beat their quota. So setting the right behaviors up is really, really important to the bottom line. The next one is pretty simple, and that's to keep it simple. Ideally, your plans don't have more than 3 separate components. And the reason for this is probably pretty obvious, but it is worth calling out. When you have more than that, or more than 3 different mechanisms on how people are paid, it can become confusing for the people getting paid to determine which behaviors they should prioritize. And that also feeds to the next point, which is it's really important to get it right, not only because it drives better performance, as I just mentioned, but also because sellers are going to decompose and game the plan to their advantage. Right? Especially SEs, right? We are methodical, we are detail-oriented, right? We are going to find a way to decompose that plan to our advantage. And, that can be a really good thing or a really bad thing. And if it's not designed correctly, it can be a really bad thing. I mean, the most obvious example is things like where people are sandbagging their deals because of the timing. Where, for example, let's say we've got an SE and a sales rep who are on the same sort of plan, and they're at 50% of the quota with 2 weeks left in the quarter. They've got 2 deals in the pipeline that are going to close next week, but they're only going to basically add 40% quota to their attainment. What do? They say, you know what, let's work with the customer to push this out an extra week so it comes into the next quarter. So now we start our next quarter at 40% and have a higher chance of hitting our accelerators in that quarter because we're not going to hit them this one. So it's really important that you make sure you get the right mechanics right here so that that people aren't gaming their plan.
I have to ask, just because you brought up a really interesting example, do you have any advice on how you can help people design plans that avoid gaming the system, especially things around timing like you just described?
Yeah, there are a couple things. It is very specific to the organization and their sales cycles and things like that. But I think aligning the timing of your plans to your sales cycles is really important. You probably shouldn't necessarily be having quarterly plans if you've got 9, 12-month sales cycles. It probably doesn't necessarily make that much sense. Lower sales cycle times shorter times for comp plans are more aligned for very transactional type businesses. Creating hybrid plans tends to work as well, where you've got an annual and a quarterly component, right? And even things like tying accelerators just to the annual output rather than the quarterly output will mean that they're not going to necessarily want to hold stuff back or push it forward artificially. And I've even seen situations where you've got specific bonuses for the number of quarters that you hit your number in a year. And the more that you hit, the higher your bonus is going to be. So it basically encourages people to put their foot on the gas throughout the entire year, not just to coast at certain times.
Thanks. Really good things to think about.
And so the last one is really important. And I kind of alluded to this earlier, is as pre-sales leaders, we need to be involved in the comp planning process early on. And Vivun did a study last year that showed that 40% of pre-sales leaders didn't feel that their comp plans were effective. And I think part of that was because they weren't necessarily part of the planning and compensation process, and the plans were essentially imposed upon them. And I think that it's really important. I don't think pre-sales can sit back and assume that sales and finance are just going to create the right plan for pre-sales on their own. Sales historically hasn't looked out for pre-sales' best interests, although thankfully that's starting to improve across the industry. And depending on the maturity of the organization, finance in a lot of cases may actually be focused on margin, which runs completely counter to sales' focus on revenue. And so it's really important that pre-sales is in the room advocating for how comp is best going to represent driving the right behaviors for pre-sales. And so be involved early, build a data-driven business case for your asks, like Brent was alluding to before. And I know that there's not a ton of material out there about how to do that, but I will throw out one really obvious item, which is in most organizations, pre-sales is more highly leveraged than sales is. Unless you've got a 1-to-1 sales to pre-sales ratio, every dollar you spend on pre-sales is going to be more highly leveraged than the same dollar spent on sales. If you're a 5-to-1 sales to pre-sales ratio, and you spend $100 on pre-sales, that's equivalent to spending $500 in sales. So you use that to your advantage when you're building your business case. All right, so we often get hung up on dollars and cents. We focus on the on-target earnings, but I think it's important to think about comp really holistically, because there really are a litany of options available to choose from, both monetary and non-monetary. And you can see a slew of them that are listed here. I think if finance is restricting things like the salary or on-target variable pay for your team or your new hires, they're often going to be open to other types of financial compensation that might appeal to your team or your candidates. For example, new hires in an organization with a long ramp time, and we know that that can be really long for pre-sales, even as up to a year or even longer. A lot of those new hires might actually value a robust drawer guarantee during that ramp time over a superior salary, for example. Right. And so think about holistically where you can push and pull when finance is saying no on a salary. That doesn't mean you can't compensate someone where they need to come in at. A few other considerations I'll throw out here. One is know your team, right? The same way we don't, or we shouldn't assume what our prospects want when we demo them. As managers, we shouldn't assume we know what our team wants in a comp plan. And so my suggestion is to ask them what they think of their current plan and what they'd like to see ideally changed in the future plans, aside, not just from higher numbers, which we all want. I every year would ask my team, we were always on individual only plans, and always ask them if they ever had any interest in a team-based plan. And they didn't, but had they, I would absolutely have advocated for some sort of component to be added to do it, because we want them to be happy as well. I think it's important to call out too that, despite the numbers at the beginning and then the slides that Brett showed, I think only 10% talked about sort of recognition, but non-monetary rewards can absolutely be just as impactful to a lot of people as cash, right? Ensuring that pre-sales is equitably included in things like President's Club and other sales awards, and they're given equal recognition for their accomplishments, not only is going to motivate them as individuals in the team, but it also lets them know that the organization as a whole values pre-sales as much as sales. And that's important.
Well, now that you've opened the door on President's Club, I think I have to ask a question about it. In my career, it's one of those things that's really exciting when you get to go. But it's also one of those friction points with individuals and other leaders. And, I always sort of struggle with it a little bit myself and see other people struggle with it too. So I thought I might ask, what are your thoughts on how pre-sales leaders should think about handling President's Club to ensure they don't inadvertently create those kinds of friction points?
Yeah, I'll give one facetious answer and one serious one. So the facetious one is I would ask sales leadership if anybody on the sales team could make President's Club if pre-sales wasn't around. And the serious answer is, like comp planning, this is something that should be brought up very early on, right? President's Club is going to be part of a budgeting and planning process. Make sure you're at the table with sales leadership when those discussions are happening so that you can advocate right from the start. It's a lot harder after the fact to try and get money added to the budget to add people in. So
yeah, and I think for the people that maybe make it or don't make it, knowing where they stand, how they get there is really important as they think about the behavior across the course of the year.
Yeah, that's a great point. You need to be very clear about what is going to get them there for sure. All right, next slide. Okay, so a couple of things to think about in your plans, and there are so many different variables and permutations and combinations. The calculator Brett and Vivun built is really, really neat. There's a lot of levers you can pull. I'm going to touch on just a couple of them here. Obviously, we could talk about this for hours. The first one is to, where possible, consider avoiding activity-based metrics like the number of demos or discovery calls. And the reason why is pretty simple. They tend to drive artificial activity, like unqualified demos, right? Or splitting discovery calls in two to double the count. And so they're really actually driving the wrong behavior most of the time. Next one is the concept of individual versus team quotas. And again, even this topic, this bullet point could probably take up an entire webinar, but I'm going to call it 3 small points on this one. The first is the best plans are those where an individual has a direct impact on their earnings. And if you're using team or pooled quotas, the higher up the hierarchy you go, for example, if you're not just using a country or a region, but you're using, let's say, the entire global quota for the organization, the less impact each individual has on that number and hence their own earnings. And that can be really demoralizing if they know that no matter how great they're acting on any given deal and it closes, it's not materially going to move the dial for them. It can be demotivating. So definitely try and think about that. The second is that there are advantages and disadvantages to both individual and team quotas. And because of that, a hybrid approach where you have both individual and team quota per components often allows pre-sales leaders to get the best of both worlds. So if that's a possibility, consider doing that in order to sort of get around the challenges that each of them individually might offer. And the third thing I'll call out is that not all behaviors need to be incentivized. Brett did talk earlier about the fact that if we're supporting non-compensated behavior, that's not a good thing. But I think there's a difference between doing demos for customers for new features that come out and trying to figure out a way to have to incentivize teamwork, for example, or collaboration, right? And I hear about a lot of pre-sales leaders who artificially choose a team-based plan, for example, or quota, for example, because they feel that incentivizes teamwork and collaboration, right? Or collaboration of team assets. And my response to that is that pre-sales salaries tend to be fairly robust, especially these days where there's so much demand for that talent. And there should be some expectation that that salary brings with it some responsibilities for the overall pre-sales team. And so what I would say is, when you're drawing up your job descriptions, include those responsibilities so that new hires come into the job with those expectations in place. And I do think that things like teamwork and collaboration are more of a cultural issue necessarily than a compensation issue. So the next point is around accelerators. Hopefully everyone's familiar with what accelerators are. When you hit a certain threshold, then your payout rate tends to increase. I'll throw a couple of really small tactical tips here. One is, wherever possible, try and avoid decelerators and caps where people's comp actually gets cut off at a certain level, let's say 200 to 300%. They can both be massively deflating, and they actually incentivize people to shut down when they hit their number, right? At the end of the day, high compensation is a really good thing. Our goal in sales and pre-sales should be to pay everyone on our teams a truckload of money, because if that's the case, that means we're killing our quotas, we're killing our targets. The other thing to think about with accelerators, just really quickly, is if you do have team quotas, either lower the hurdle rates to hit those accelerators or make the accelerators a higher multiple. Because they're going to be more difficult to hit because they're a team-based number, it's important that the reward for getting there is more impactful. So the next one is to basically, I mentioned earlier, talk to your people, understand what they want to do, be flexible. One size doesn't always fit all. And if you can, consider different plans, either for individual or situational differences that require unique behaviors or approaches. And those differences could be things like different geographies, different products that are being sold, and there's different types of sales methodologies, how long the SEs have been on the team. I talked earlier about sort of ramp times and guarantees. It could be based on your sales cycle length. So there's a lot of different situations where different plans might apply depending on what your organizational situation looks like. So the next point is that, you can't really operate, I'm actually on the wrong plan here. Consider different plans. That was actually the last one. Let's go to the next one, Perry. So I kind of covered that one already. There we go. So don't operate in a vacuum. What does that mean? So what I mean is you can design what you think is a great plan for your organization and culture, but we have to be recognizable to the fact that, as Brett showed on one of his first slides, there's something like 120,000 open pre-sales job recs right now. There's massive competition for talent, and our best performers are going to get offers from other competitors and other firms. And so if we're looking at our comp plans solely as they're a great fit for our people that are here, but not thinking about what other people might be offering them outside of us to tempt them away from us, then we're going to lose more people than we'd like. So just think about what the marketplace is bearing and how other people are potentially trying to poach your people and how you can defend against that. So MBOs, or management by objectives, for those who aren't familiar with the term, is really sort of discretionary type comp where managers tend to be able to sort of define non-revenue type goals for their team that they can then assign or allocate out a bonus pool of dollars to. And while they tend to be exactly that, discretionary comp, that can actually be a good thing if you don't have the plan that you want. If you're not able to get a plan that can adequately reward the right behaviors and reward the right people for being top performers, having things like an MBO can allow you some sort of discretion to allocate out funds to those top performers to keep them happier. All right, and the last one here is hopefully pretty obvious to everyone, but maybe not so. And that is, it's a lot easier to retain the people you have than it is to replace them, both just in logistics and absolutely in cost. And what I would say about this is, don't wait until your people tell you they're leaving to react. Try and be proactive as much as possible, because it's much easier to respond than after they've already accepted an offer before they accept an offer than after they've already accepted it. And so what I used to do with my team is I would always encourage my team to talk to anyone that calls them, recruiters, other companies, whatever, because ultimately I'm here for them, right? I value them. And frankly, if they get a better offer, I'm not going to stand in their way, but I do want the opportunity to match or exceed it before they leave. And just hearing that, to know that A, you're not trying to prevent them from finding other opportunities, but B, you want them there and you're willing to match stuff. Oftentimes, that's enough to keep people around. I find that a lot of salespeople, SEs, tend to leave because they don't think they can get what they want from their organization. If they know ahead of time that they might be able to, then they tend not to look as much.
Yeah, and I think a comment for me here is, in the past, we've talked with John Kerr in a past webinar about the cost of losing your top pre-sales resource, often, costing companies upwards of $3 million by losing their best SEs. But, my take here is, it's a very costly mistake to not assume that your team is constantly being recruited. So to your point, take the calls, read the emails, LinkedIn requests. A lot of those things are happening. And if you think that they're not, then you're mistaken. They are. You get probably multiple a month, if not multiple a week, from recruiting in the SE role. And so I would just make the assumption that if you feel like a key team member is undercompensated for the work that they're doing, the outcome they're driving for the company, there's a pretty good chance, almost a definite chance, that they think that too, right? They may have already started to mentally move on in some ways if you don't start to address that issue earlier. So if they're feeling that way, they're feeling undervalued, you just want to make sure that you're staying ahead of those competitive offers, right? If you know your top person was to leave, what would you do? I think it's worth thinking about and considering as to whether it's time to think about restructuring and looking at their compensation to tie it closer to the value they're bringing the organization, and really your inability to replace them as well.
Yeah, great points, Brett. I'll throw out a totally tangential benefit of encouraging your people to talk to competitors, and that is you can collect massively important competitive intel by having those conversations, assuming they stay, obviously.
Yeah, very, very good. A very good point there.
Okay, next slide. All right, so I know we're getting a little short on time here, so I'll try and cover this one quickly. But we talk about retaining people, and so I think it's really important, if it's not obvious, that we really need to create the right culture where people want to stick around. And so one thing I think is important to call out is I think it's really clear that people work for people just as much, if not more, than they work for organizations. And so it's critical that you have a really good relationship with your employees and vice versa. We've all heard that you can collect more flies with honey, but ultimately people are going to go the extra mile for a boss they like, right? And frankly, they'll probably even stick around in situations that aren't ideal for them. And so it's really critical that we have meaningful relationships with our people, know what drives them, know what their situations are, right? I had a client recently that had an SC that was feeling a little burnt out after being in pre-sales for 20 years. And rather than just have them leave, they proactively suggested a year-long sabbatical with the knowledge that their job would be waiting for them when they were ready to come back, right? And so be flexible and be encouraging to your team. Take an interest in their lives, right? We work so hard to find connections with our prospects when we're selling to them. And it's important we do even a harder job or a better job of that with our team, right? And even things like, you should know the names of all of your team members, immediate family members, and be proactively asking about them, as a small example. I think it's also incumbent that we properly develop our teams as effectively as we can, right? And so we also need to recognize that not everyone is or aspires to be a pre-sales lifer. And so when you're thinking about career paths and you're helping talk to your team about where their career where they want to go with their career, right? It might not be on your team, right? Or in your organization, right? But it's better to lose someone to another department in your firm than it is to lose them to a competitor, right? And so don't be that manager that blocks someone from going over into product management or into sales because you're so afraid of losing them. Work for what's best for your team, and it'll come back on you. I think it's really important that we develop the skills. Obviously, hopefully everyone's doing ongoing enablement, but professional development opportunities are really important. Things like mentoring programs to when there isn't necessarily an obvious promotion that's available, develop someone into a mentor so that they're that much more prepared when that next opportunity does come available. Give them the opportunities to pursue special projects, either individually or across team initiatives, right? And please, and I'm not saying this because I am a coach, spend time on coaching, right? There's two reasons. One, it is the most effective way to improve performance. Sales Executive Council research found that coaching improves quota attainment by up to 19%. So think about what a 19% bump in your attainment will look like for your paycheck and your team's paychecks, right? And the second is SEs expect coaching, right? We saw it in that first slide, 42% of people want coaching, right? But there's some research was done by a firm called Zenger Folkman that said that 60% of sellers will actually leave an organization if their manager is a poor coach, right? So make sure you're putting the time into coaching, even if it's only a little bit per month, per week. It's got to be part of your arsenal when you're working your team. And if you can't do enough on your own, look to third parties to help as well.
And I think two comments from me. One is when you talked about losing people to other departments within your organization, you can't control what your team wants to do in the future. They're going to want their career paths that they want. So don't, to your point, stand in the way. I think the the best loss you could possibly have of a person is internally and still adding value to your organization, as opposed to having them leave and go to a competitor. And lastly, one of the things that I would think about is if you're a manager of managers in your pre-sales leadership role, think about when you're looking at internal promotions within, who are the people that are individual contributors that exhibit those signs that they have the inclination to coach and to help the other team members around them. It's so important as they look to that next level of their career that you're going to be putting them in a position to do that naturally over a team that needs that to succeed. So just a few comments. I totally agree with what you said there, Gary.
Cool. And so the last one here is pretty obvious too, but ensure your team knows that you'll defend them and you're going to fight for what they deserve, right? That needs to be visible to them, right? Be their biggest cheerleader, both internally and externally. If the company win announcements are going out and it's not giving equal billing to your SEs as it is to the sales team, then reply all to everybody, calling out your SE and what an amazing job they did on it, right? Hopefully you're advocating with whoever's sending those out in the first place to give equal billing, but be their cheerleader. Even do it externally, right? Post on LinkedIn when someone on your team gets promoted, right? Not only is it going to help increase the morale of the people on your team that are currently there, it's going to let new prospective hires know that you value your team, right? And that's a place that they're going to want to go to work. And we all know that we're all most effective when we have minimal distractions, right? And so where possible, try and insulate your team members from the organizational noise that's out there and any other blockers that are preventing them from being most effective. Your job is to make it easier for them to do their job. That's what I had for today.
Thank you so much, Carrie. Thank you, Brett, as well. I just want to remind everybody that we'll be on Slack for a little while longer. Please bring in your questions. I'm sure there's plenty pouring in. And just a few comments on today's session. So valuable. It's these topics, compensation, rewards, culture, coaching, they're also inextricably linked. So this was really neat to see the holistic view that you take. And so much of the ability to have a great culture is really founded on if you have a fair comp plan, right? And are you understanding your team and individual goals and designing that right plan? And then everything kind of stems from there. And one note on some of the information you shared today, Carrie, I really liked how you talked about not compensating people based on activities. Definitely had seen that in my past. And that, doesn't drive the right behavior. Although it could be very important to understand where people are spending their time for coaching, for development, for, making sure that they're spending their time on the right things to be successful. Loved your points about fighting for influence and really asking pre-sales leaders to rise to the occasion, not just accept what the sales leadership team is relegating you to in terms of President's Club or the comp structure, kind of standing up to even your CFO and building that case for what your team needs in terms of resources as well, coaching. Once again, we have those great guides that are going to help you get started. This all sounds great. And we all know it's actually difficult to put together these right plans. So hopefully these tools can help you out. We'll drop those in Slack. And we're looking forward to keeping the conversation going. So thank you so much, everybody.